Hello everyone and welcome back to Video Editing 1 with Professor Harris. Today we're going to be going through Lesson 9, Freeze Frames and Motion Effects. So, as you've experienced, you'll adjust content length and timing while refining a sequence. But what if you needed to lengthen a shot but have reached the end of the available footage? Or what if you wanted to adjust the clip's speed to fit an accompanying narration better? Well, in this lesson, we're going to introduce some simple solutions to those problems under the guise of motion effects. By the end, you'll know how to vary clip playback speed and create freeze frames from source footage. So we're going to be working in Rock Climber this time. Now let's look at some of the goals that we're going to have for this lesson. Number 1, we're going to explore the different motion effect types. Number 2, we're going to create freeze frames. And number 3, we're going to change a clip's speed. All right, let's get into it. All right, let's look first at the types of motion effects. As mentioned, motion effects alter clip playback speed. In Media Composer, you can create 3 types of motion effects. First is freeze frame. Second is motion effect, and third is time warp effect. Freeze frame displays a single frame from a clip for a duration that you set. Motion effects speed up or slow down video at a constant rate of speed. Time warp effects use keyframes to vary timeline segment speed over time. For example, to add drama or tension, you could add a time warp effect to a shot of a person running and fluidly ramp from normal speed to slow motion. And you could build that sort of tension if there's kind of a chase sequence or a dramatic motion, a scene. So something that's coming to mind is like I don't know if this is true, but what's coming to mind is in Hunger Games when Primrose gets injured and Katniss is looking at her from a distance. I don't know if I'm remembering this all correctly, but I feel like time does slow down in those shots, and we can spend that extra time kind of pulling out that extra drama. So we'll create freeze frames and constant speed motion effects from source clips or subclips in the Composer Windows source monitor. So we're going to create constant motion effects and we're going to create freeze frames in the source monitor. But we're going to create time warp effects by adding the effect directly to segments in the timeline. So that's all going to happen down here. Depending on what stage your edit's in and the effect you want to create, one may be more convenient than the other. Quick note here on time warp effects. They're also covered in more detail in Media Composer Fundamentals 2, MC101. We're going to cover that later in the semester, so we won't go into too much detail here. But let's now move into freeze frames, because that's one of the highlights for this lesson. So as mentioned before, you'll generate freeze frames in the source monitor by either source clips or subclips. That's all, again, going to happen up here in our source monitor. But before we explore how to create freeze frames, let's look at 2 critical considerations: render type and source footage. Understand that these will help you create high-quality freeze frames. First, if you're generating a freeze frame from a full resolution clip, you may need to tell Media Composer how to render the freeze frame clip. The render type you choose depends on whether you're working with progressive or interlaced footage, and how interlaced footage you're rendering. Your render selection depends on how much motion occurs within your shot. So we're going to be picking different types based off the different kinds of footage. Again, that's interlaced and progressive. I have an image here to help you quickly understand this, because we're going to get into more detail in a second. But before we do, I want you to have a basic understanding of how this works. So there's 2 different video types, essentially: interlaced and progressive. Interlaced is loading it kind of line by line, but only loading half, so it's leaving these gaps. And let's say you generated a freeze frame, you might have jitter because of these missing lines, and if there's movement in your shot. So we'll go into the specifics of it, but there's two different versions for generating freeze frames because of this. And then there's progressive, where it's loading the whole image, every single frame, so you don't necessarily have to worry about this kind of jitter. But I'm going to leave it there. But for your reference, again, this is kind of the difference going forward. There's 2 major video types, and even motion. If there's motion in the shot, there's going to be considerations for how you're going to want to render this. And I will do my best to keep this as straightforward and non-confusing as possible. Okay, let's keep moving. So Media Composer includes these 2 render types for such occasions. First, there's both fields. You'll always choose this render type when working with progressive footage. That's 24p, 25p, and so on. That's that consistent shot, right? It's rendering every line. Also, this render type works best on interlaced footage like 1080i, for example, with no inner field motion. Inner field motion is just movement, quick movements. So in other words, static shots with no movement would work best if we're loading with that interlaced footage render type. So this option uses both fields in interlaced footage to generate a freeze frame clip. So again, going back to interlaced, let me pull that screenshot up again. I've since closed it. Let me pull it back up. Thinking about it this way, we're using both fields, 1 and 2, to generate an image. And this works best if we have shots that are stagnant and don't change very much. So from one shot to the next, since it's loading half at a time, if, let's say, we're in an interview and the guy's not talking, that would be good to capture using the both fields render option. Okay. So shots with inner field motion or movement in the shot, like rapid movement, for example, person running or swinging a bat, will show noticeable jitter because of temporal differences between both fields. So again, high movement is going to cause that jitter. The next option is interpolated field, which is the default. This works best on interlaced footage with inner field motion. So if we have shots that have movement in it, we have another render type. So if we have interlaced footage and there is movement going on, you would choose interpolated field, which is a default setting for generating freeze frames. It deletes the second field and then combines scan line pairs from the first field to create a second field. For freeze frames made from interlaced footage, this produces a high quality result that does not jitter. So again, we have both fields, which is good for progressive shots that are just stagnant and full, and interlaced shots that are stagnant, and then interpolated field, which is another render type, and that's good for interlaced footage that is moving. Okay, I hope that all makes sense. Let's move on. Okay, so to verify or change freeze frame render type, we can go to Composer, making sure we're selected on Media Composer. We can go to Composer, Freeze Frame, and then we can see both fields, using both fields and using interpolated footage. Interpolated field. So again, it's set by default to interpolated field because you might be using interlaced footage, and that might need to render with motion in mind. So one thing to note here, your computer monitor does not display both fields of interlaced footage. So if you're working with interlaced footage, keep in mind it's always gonna show as progressive because if you have an updated monitor. So when you're working with interlaced footage, be sure to view your freeze frames and motion effects on a broadcast monitor so you can evaluate the results and quality. Otherwise, you won't know that your shots, your freeze frames and other things don't look good. You're not going to know that unless you're using the right screen. So let's understand fields and frames. So you may be wondering why, or you may be wondering at some point when you are working with interlaced footage instead of progressive, why is this happening? So during television's initial development, the engineers tried to get the entire picture to draw on the screen one line at a time from top to bottom. Unfortunately, the technology at the time couldn't do this fast enough, so because it just couldn't, and so we would end up with these screen artifacts. So these were it's kind of like screen tearing things from the last shot, and it was just unwatchable. So to overcome this, engineers decided to draw half of the frames first, skip every other line before drawing the second half to fill in the skipped lines. And this ended up being called interlaced because the frame consists of two interwoven interlaced parts known as fields. So even though the engineers could have bypassed interlacing when developing high-definition video, they kept it for backwards compatibility. So now that even though we have HD TV, they decided to keep that interlaced for that backwards compatibility because you don't want to shoot your old customers in the foot. You know, it's like going back to colored TV versus black and white TV. We had the different systems that came out, and I believe it was RCA was broadcasting with backwards compatibility in mind. So you didn't have to buy a new color TV to watch their programs. They would still broadcast them with the ability to watch them in black and white and color. That's a good way to get a competitive advantage, make sure that people's old tech isn't irrelevant going forward. Anyway, quick note on that, but we'll keep moving. So let me display some images from the book here real quick. So the following image shows the interlaced order for HD video with fields numbered. So we have field 1, we have the frame, and we have field 2. So we can see that these are generating different parts of the image. So the NTSC, PAL, and 1080 line interlaced formats, written as 1080i, use interlaced fields. 720 line HD is progressive. And you may work with progressive versions of 1080 line HD as well. Wait, what about backwards compatibility? Since modern technology achieved what the original designers intended, creating frames one line at a time from top to bottom of the screen, a while ago, the two-field interlaced method is now being phased out. So resolution higher than HD are always progressive. So if we have HD, that's 4K, it's always going to be progressive. That's enough tech talk for now, so let's review some guidelines for selecting a render type. So we'll use the interpolated field render type when working with NTSC 29.97i, PAL 25i, or 1080i media. This is all interlaced frame footage. We'll be using both fields for rendering when working with NTSC 24p, 23.976p, PAL 25p or 24p, 720p or 1080p media. Again, progressive frames. All right. Using the interpolated field render type with progressive media won't necessarily get you in trouble. It could cause a slightly softer image to appear when you are generating freeze frames. However, using both fields render type for interlaced media will almost always get you in trouble due to the interlaced field motion, even if it's not noticeable before creating the freeze frame. For example, the blink of an eye, a blink will appear as a visible flutter in the freeze frame created from interlaced media using both field render types. So you're going to get that jitter again. Let's look at how to create freeze frames. So to make it easier to edit a freeze frame clip into your sequence, make a little longer than what you think you'll need. So make sure that clip's a little bit longer. The exact duration isn't critical since you can always trim the clip later. So if just make sure you have enough to get that freeze in there. All right, let's go into the steps of creating a freeze frame from our source clips. Okie dokie. So to create a freeze frame, first thing we're going to do is load a clip into the source monitor and place the position indicator on the frame you want to freeze. So I've already done this. I've loaded R04, 151, matte climbing, and I have slid my position indicator where I want it. This is a nice, pretty steady shot. He's not moving too much. He's trying to hook it, and I think that it would make a nice freeze frame. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to double check the render type by going to Composer, Freeze Frame, and then using either the interpolated field or using both fields. This is progressive footage. So what are we going to use? I'm going to give you a second. Think about this really hard. Progressive footage, we use both fields. That's right. So we'll go to Composer, Freeze Frames, and we'll set this to both fields. So now that setting has been set. Okay, to set the freeze frame's duration, we can go back to Composer, Freeze Frame, and we can set how long we want to make this freeze frame, because we're essentially making a new source kind of clip, but it's going to be just a freeze frame. So I'm going to set mine to 15 because I don't think I need 30. Cool. And then we need to select a destination drive for this media. So we'll set it to Macintosh HD. We'll click OK, and then we're going to select the bin that we're going to leave it in. It is a good idea to keep your rendered media in the same bin where you got it from, although I feel like other editors might want to save this to maybe their effects or SFX bin. Again, personally, I feel like it should stay in video because it is a visual element. We're just making a freeze frame, so I'm going to leave it in video and click OK. You could make a new bin for it. You could label it FF for freeze frame. You can really do whatever you want, but as long as you're organized, that is the most important thing. Yeah. Cool. So now it has created a new freeze frame, and we can see it here, R04 matte climbing. And if I slide the name convention thing, we can see this FF at the end, and that's representative for freeze frame. Cool. Awesome. A few notes about freeze frame effects. You can access the freeze frame menu by right-clicking in the source monitor. So we could just click in here and go to freeze frame, and my eyes deceive me. The menu is always so small. I never see what I'm looking for. It's in there, trust me. And then once you save a freeze frame clip, Media Composer automatically adds it to the bin and loads it into the source monitor. So it has been loaded into our source monitor. So if I hit play on this, it's not going to do anything because we created a freeze frame. We have a beautiful both field rendered progressive field freeze frame. So that's very nice. To distinguish freeze frame clips from other clips in the bin, Media Composer adds the FF to the end of the clip's name. We already pointed that out. We can see it here. It's also, the icon's a little bit different. We can see it's kind of got this little tilt to it and three little streaks. So we know it's different than our other media. And Media Composer remembers your render type and duration selection until you exit the application. So we have it set to make 15-second freeze frames. If we leave the application and come back, it's going to be reset to interpolated field, and it's going to have that default set of 30 seconds. So generally, you want to store rendered media on the same drive as the rest of your media. That said, there are some exceptions to this guideline, particularly when working with shared storage. So if you are working with a shared project, you're going to want to make sure you're saving it to shared locations. Otherwise, people won't be able to access the stuff you're creating. Let's actually add a freeze frame to our timeline. So my sequences, I have RC Montage V2 open, so I'm going to make sure that that's open. And I can navigate to my video bin, and I can locate that freeze frame I made. Here it is. We can double select it and load it into our source monitor. And then similar to how we would do other videos, we would set in, we could play it, we could set it out for 2 or 3 seconds, whatever it is we want. We could find where it is we want to drop it in a timeline, make sure the correct V1 are your source tracks and your correct source tracks, your video tracks for this, because there is no audio with your freeze frame. It's not going to make audio to go with it. And then we can kind of pick where we want it to put it, and then holding Command, we can move our playhead, snap it to a position, and I could hit B to overwrite and insert that footage. Now we have this lovely freeze frame in the middle of our montage that adds nothing and makes no sense, but at least it's there. So that's how you would interact with it. Okay, now let's move on to creating motion effects. As with freeze frames, you'll load clips into the source monitor to create motion effects. Then you'll use the motion effect editor button to execute the process. Since this button isn't mapped by default, you'll want to add it. This is a huge step. If you forget to do this, you're going to be lost. You're going to be very lost. All right, to map the motion effects editor button to the source monitor toolbar, we're going to do the following. We're going to open the command palette. So we'll hit Command 3 or Control 3 on our computer. This is going to open the command palette. We're going to make sure that button to button reassignment is selected here on the left. And then we're going to tab over to the FX tab, and we're going to click the motion effects editor button, and we're going to drag that to an available spot under our source monitor. I'm going to put mine right here because I think that's a convenient spot. This is a different button. This is a different editor. We haven't used this yet, so you're definitely going to want to map it. If you don't map it, I'll talk about that later, but if you don't map it now, we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so now that we have it mapped to a button on either our interface or our keyboard, if we wanted to map it to our keyboard, we could do Command 3. We could make sure that button-to-button reassignment is on, and we can open our command palette by going File, Settings, or Keyboard palette, Users, and then going to Keyboard. Where's Keyboard? Keyboard, double-clicking our keyboard, and then we could shrink this, and then we could go to the Effects tab, and we could map it to a button on our keyboard. If you wanted to do it that way. If it was a function that you're using frequently, if motion effects is your field of professionality, then yeah, I would say map it to your keyboard. Go for it. Okay, let me close all this stuff. Okay, so we'll load a clip into the source monitor that we actually want to speed up. Let's see this one. I don't like that clip. Let's do something else. You want to speed up his walking? Sure, why not? That looks silly, right? Obviously, I'm scrubbing through the clip, so it's gonna look jittery and stuff. Let's yeah, let's just use this. I'm gonna clear my marks, so I'm gonna hit G to clear my marks. All right, now that we have our clip loaded in the source monitor, we're gonna click the motion effect button we mapped to our source monitor toolbar. So we'll go ahead and click this, and boom, it opens our motion effect editor. So in the motion effect dialog box, we'll fill in the variable speed options. For example, 80% in the speed field to double the source clip speed. So we're at 50% currently, so we'll change it to 80%. Awesome. And we're going to leave all these settings the way that they are. And we'll go ahead and we will click OK, or create at the bottom, excuse me. We can also choose, for example, both fields for 24p footage. So we can select which field we want this to go to. So we can do both fields, and this is progressive footage, so we are going to hit both fields. And then we can click to create and select our destination bin. So I'll hit create. We're going to make sure our target drive is set to Macintosh HD, by the way. I'll hit create, and then it's going to ask us which bin we want to make or set it to. So once we select a bin, I'm going to go to video because I said I would go to video earlier, so I'll do that again. So boom, it appears in our video now. So once Media Composer creates the effects, it adds the new clip to the destination bin with the frame rate appended to the clip's name and loads it into the source monitor. So we automatically have this loaded in the source monitor, but we can also see the FPS it's set. So it's set to 19.19 now, and now we have a shot. So if I could play, and I can't because I'm currently screen recording, we would be able to see that this shot is indeed sped up. But we can't see that because my computer's dumb, or at least not as powerful as the computers in the lab. So let's explore some tips to use while creating motion effects in the source monitor. Number one, if you skipped mapping the motion effect editor to a button on the source monitor toolbar or a key on our keyboard, we can apply the effect from the command palette by activating active palette button, by clicking the active palette button. So if you were lazy and you didn't map this by hitting command 3 and then going to the effects tab, making sure button-to-button reassignment is on and dragging it there, you could instead set it to active palette. We could load something into the source monitor and we could hit active palette. Now these buttons are active, and I could click this button and it would bring up that same motion effects dialog box, and I could set this. It's already set to 80, so we got all kinds of stuff, and we can hit create and then choose our bin and set it to video. We can see that will also create it. So again, if you're lazy, you don't want to set this to one of your buttons in your composer menu toolbar or somewhere else, you can use just the command palette. Number two, the variable speed parameter includes two columns. The left column shows current duration and frame rate. So let me open that back up here. Let's select a new clip, and then we'll go ahead and do the same. So we can see these different columns here. Okay, so the variable speed parameter includes two columns. We have the left column shows current duration and frame rate, while the right column displays new duration and frame rate. So you get to choose between three speed creation values. We have frame duration, frame rate, or speed percentage. So when you fill in one field, the other two automatically update to reflect your change. Creating a constant speed effect in Media Composer is straightforward once you understand how Media Composer creates them. To help you achieve the desired speed result, here are some additional tips to keep in mind when filling out the variable speed selections. Again, we're in our variable speed selections. We have 1, 2, 3 different ways to do this. So entering a high value in the current duration in the duration field creates a slower motion effect. Entering a smaller number creates a faster motion effect. Okay, keep that in mind. Entering a higher value in the current frame rate in the FPS frames per second field creates a faster motion effect. Entering a smaller number creates a slower motion effect. Entering a number below 100 in the percentage speed field creates a slow motion effect. A number greater than 100 creates a faster motion effect. So I might have said that backwards. Entering a number below 100 in the speed field creates a slow motion. Entering a number greater than 100, fast motion. And then entering a negative value in either the rate or speed fields creates a reverse motion effect. So let's enter a value a negative value. So we'll go negative 80 in our speed, and we'll hit create. Rate motion effect must be 0. Use freeze frames instead. Maybe there's a space in between. There we go. No, there was a space in between. That's why it didn't work. So if I hit create, go to video, click OK. You can see this new video I made, and this is actually in reverse. Very cool. Oh, we can see the rope. You can see the rope. He's like pushing it up, and it's falling down. Yeah. Okay, cool. So, in addition to achieving desired speed results, you'll want to generate the best quality motion effect possible. This means knowing what to choose in the Render to Field Motion Effect using option. Let's look at that now. Okay, I don't need all these, so I'm going to go ahead and delete these just out of my bin before we move on here, just because I like to keep my stuff free of clutter. We won't delete the associated media files, we'll just delete what's been created. So we are now free of our motion effects. Okay, so setting the proper render method when doing our motion effects. As you saw in the previous section's workflow, you need to tell Media Composer which render method to use to create a motion effect. This matters because the results can be more noticeable than with freeze frames. No need to worry, you can change the method if you don't care for the result. So let's open and let's render another one here. We'll click our motion effect editor, and it'll bring up our motion effect dialog box. And under our render method, we can select what we want. Duplicated field, both field, interpolated field, VTR style. Let's look at this. So to eliminate guesswork, let's examine the 4 methods. So duplicated field, the first one. Let me hover over it while I talk about it. Cuts the vertical resolution in half by dropping one of the image's fields, resulting in a lower quality image. Unless you're creating a stylized effect, you won't want to choose this option. This legacy method once served as a quick creation solution duration during an offline edit and compensated for slow computer processing and longer render times. So not always the best option. Both fields, which is the default, works well on interlaced footage with minimal inner field motion and for still video shots. You'll always choose this when working with progressive media. Again, 24p, 25p, and so on. All the footage we're working with here is progressive, so we chose it when we were creating effects earlier with the both field option. Sorry, make sure I'm hovering over each thing. Okay, and then the interpolated field calculates the motion effect at the field level rather than the frame level. This method deletes the second field and creates a new second field by combining the field line pairs from the first field. So if we have interpolated footage and there's a lot of movement in it, we're going to click the interpolated field option. And then we have VTR style. VTR style calculates the motion effect at the field level rather than the frame level. This method creates a second field by shifting field information by a full scan line. And it creates a very smooth motion effect with minimal reduction in detail. Although if you enter very slow speeds, you may notice a slow vertical jitter due to the field shifts. So, like the other effects, when you edit motion effects and freeze frames into the sequence, Media Composer adds an icon to the segment. So we saw that little slanted icon in our upper left in the bin menu area. The motion effect icon serves a dual function. It identifies the motion effect and the render method used to generate it. This information comes in handy during later editing stages, especially if previous editor generated the wrong type of motion effect. So we can tell what's being used. You can see this little icon here is changing as we select the different types. See? We got little different changes. So it's very nice. So if we're working later, we can pull that information up again. I'm going to display these now on screen a little bit bigger. So one last time, here are those different types again, the render methods for your motion effects. All right, take a second to study that, and we'll move on. Okay, let's look at one of the last options for motion effects in this lesson. So we'll be creating now motion effects using Fit to Fill. You use this option when you want to fit specific source clip content into a marked region or duration in our sequence. So unlike the splice in or overwrite edit, Fit to Fill requires 4 marks. 2 in the source monitor and 2 in the timeline. The 4 marks define 2 different durations, Media Composer calculates the difference and speeds up or slows down the source material. That means the new motion effect clip fits perfectly into the sequenced marked region. So let's look at some super simple examples. Let me explain something to you. So if you mark a 1 second duration in the source monitor, that's here, and a 2 second duration in our timeline, the fit to fill option results in a 50% speed motion effect. In other words, the material plays at half speed or twice the duration. Conversely, if you marked a 1 second duration in the source monitor and a half second duration in the timeline, the fit to fill option generates a 200% speed motion effect. Yep, you guessed it. The material plays twice as fast or in half the time. Real world examples are never this precise. You're never going to find something this close. So be aware that creating motion effects in this way can cause fractional frame rates. So that may produce lower quality results compared to even numbers. But despite that, this can still serve as an efficient way to generate, say, a very high speed version of a long, slow shot. So to create a fit to fill motion effect, we're going to set in and out marks in our sequence down here, also known as our timeline. So I'll hold Command and I'll snap it to the end of this because I'm going to put it here. I'm going to set an in with I, drag it over here, hold Command, snap it, put it out. And then next we'll load a clip into our source monitor. I'm going to use this clip here. Is this the one where he falls? No. There are two different shots where he falls. This looks like the one, but it's not. We'll mark this whole clip. So we'll select a bunch of footage. So it's going to speed up this clip when we do insert it down here. All right, next step is we're going to click our motion effect editor button. So we'll go ahead and click this bad boy. And then all we have to do is make sure we select this fit to fill option. By default, it won't be selected. So we'll click this and boom, we can see it already generates some stuff. We'll set both fields because we know that this is progressive footage, and we'll hit create. It's going to ask for bin. We're going to select video. We're going to click OK. Boom, it's going to render it, and it's going to be up here. So now when we drag through this, it looks the same, but now that we have it loaded here, and we can set our in and out marks here if we want even, or we could just leave it deselected. By default, it would grab it all. And we have our in and out marks still set in our timeline. If we hit V, it's going to fit to fill this shot. So now if I slowly drag through here, it is sped up. You can't tell. Again, I can't play the video, otherwise it just can't play. It gives me errors while I'm recording here, but you'll have to trust me, bro. It is sped up. So now we have that fit to fill sped up clip. Transversely, we could have selected a very short, region in this shot, like an in and an out, here, and then, or before creating the effect, we select a source clip and we set a very short distance in and out, and then we could use the fit to fill option here, and that shot would be very, very slow motion. But again, this one is sped up. Cool, awesome. All right, what is the next step? So Media Composer creates the new motion effect clip, places it in our bin, and loads it into the source monitor automatically, blah, 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 blah. So just press the B key or V key, and we can overwrite or splice in that that shot into where we want it in the timeline. So during the next exercise, you'll create motion effects in the Rock Climber project. But first, let's address a nuance that may arise if you click the motion effect editor button in the timeline palette. You'll open the following. So that's this button here. That's this motion effect editor button, not the one in our source monitor. We have one in our timeline. So if I select this, the timeline motion effect button opens the motion effect editor and not the motion effects dialog box. So despite the similar names, they serve different purposes. The motion effect editor lets us create and adjust the time warp effects. So this is for time warp effects, which we're going to get into. If you open this by mistake, just close it and use the source side monitor effect editor button instead. So if you accidentally open this by clicking the wrong button, I've mapped these very close to each other on my keyboard or my display. You might want to map that elsewhere, but again, if you click this, nothing's going to happen if we're set on our motion effect. But if we, again, timeline, we click it, we're going to see this bad boy appear. As mentioned, you'll use the motion effect editor to create time warp effects and modify freeze frames or motion effects you edit in the sequence. The Media Composer Fundamentals 2 book, MC110, we'll cover this later in the semester. One more final note / promise, motion effects apply only to the video portion of source clips. Creating a motion effect does not produce a motion effect clip with retimed audio. So when we make these effects, they are video only. We will not see the fruits of our labors transferred to sped up audio. We're not going to get Alvin and the Chipmunks, unfortunately. I'm sorry to break your heart. Okay, and surprisingly, that is the end of this lesson. Thank you guys so much for watching. Do not forget to get into lab. Start playing with these functions and features. Fit to Fill's a really cool function when you need it. Okay, sweet. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.